So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Any of them need an introduction, but let me join me to welcome our presidential panel. Please, Presidentes, please come on. Yeah. El presidente Jorge Quiroga de Bolivia, former president of Bolivia. El presidente Iván Duque de Colombia. El presidente Mahuad de Ecuador. Welcome everyone. Bienvenidos, presidentes. Thanks for joining us. It's such a pleasure to moderate this presidential panel. And as you may see, and you have all been expecting for this conversation, we have been talking these 2 days about what's going on around the world. And this afternoon, we want to hear from presidents, former presidents, experts who have the best knowledge of what's happening in the region. How do they think that what's happening around the world is impacting our region? So let me begin with this question. What do you think that's going on in Latin America that has to do with what's happening around the world? With the Ukrainian war, with the crisis, in the economic crisis, inflation, the post-pandemic labor market. There are so many things going on. What has happened in Latin America with all this that's going on now? Let's begin with President Quiroga. Please, President, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Maria Paula. Thank you, Iván, Jamil, Juan. Thanks, everyone. I'm Jorge Quiroga. They call me Tuto. Nickname that my father gave me, now part of my legal name. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I know many have come from different places, some here from long distances. No one has come from as high as I've come here. I live in La Paz, Bolivia, 12,000 feet. The city where I live, the airport is 13,000 feet. And if you ever want to win a bet, ask one question. Name the city that Lionel Messi has been to 4 times and never scored a goal. La Paz, Bolivia. It's the home field advantage. Quito is, Jamil, Quito's nothing. Quito, Maria Paula, nothing. So it is. But since you have him here in Miami, I'll be glad to take a free ticket next year sometime to watch him score a goal here in Miami. Maria Paula, quickly on this 12th World Strategic Forum, I want to thank Carlos Diaz and the people that are in the panel, good friends all. I would mention 2 things, one very economic, one very political, that are happening in the world that affect us all. Number one, in my perspective, from South America. Unfortunately, the United States and Europe, countries that are powerhouses economically, that we share economic values, or democratic values and principles with, are not open for trade business. The reality of the U.S. Congress currently, and I see Paula Dobriansky here, she knows that better than most, that you cannot get a free trade agreement through the U.S. Congress. I don't know that you can get much through the U.S. Congress nowadays. But in the old times, you'd get the question every 4 years. Would you prefer a Republican or a Democrat? I would always answer saying, may I have a blender, please? Generally speaking, Republicans were more open to trade. Democrats were more open to migration. But you had a middle where you could get a majority of Republicans with some Democrats to approve the Andean trade preference agreements, the Caribbean agreements, the Chile agreement, and what have you, and good migration treatment for our people with a majority of Democrats and some Republicans. But lo and behold, it seems like today we cannot get anything to help our people, the Latin American migrants. And if you want to learn from somebody, do not learn from me, learn from him. He is the best migration president in the history of Latin America, Iván Duque. He did more for Venezuelan migrants than anybody has ever done. So you don't have to look to Europe or anywhere else. He's the best Venezuelan president that Venezuela's had lately, because the rest are not much to write home about. So in trade and migration, we don't have a vital middle. In Europe, the same thing. Anybody here from South America, South America, knows that Mercosur has been negotiating with Europe for 25 years. That's the never-ending longest dating game in the history of romance ever. 25 years of negotiations. They signed 2019, and now, because of French protectionism, you cannot get the trade agreement approved for South America. So, in the midst of that context, guess what? China is open for business. And you come to the U.S. and you always hear the caveats and the warnings that, oh, China, single. I know all the things that are bad about the China political system. I do not want it. I can tell you the same thing about Azerbaijan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. I demand adherence to democratic principles with the countries that I signed them, the Americas, the Inter-American Democratic Charter. That's where you have to live by them. Just look at South America. Ecuador is engaging in trade agreements with China. Lasso may not be perfect, but I don't think he'll be accused of being a Chinese Communist Party member. Lacalle Pou, president of Uruguay, he is queued up to sign a free trade agreement with China because he tried with the U.S., he tried with Europe, couldn't get it through. So the moral of the story is, and I understand, I know all the speeches about Huawei, no way, out of my way. If China is open for business and the rest are not, then that will go that way. And do not forget, Paula knows this very well, trade agreements in and of themselves have intellectual property, state procurement rules that tend to become entrenched over time. But from South America, I'll give you that word of caution. Second political point that I like to make here briefly. There are three really bad, nefarious octopuses in the world with tentacles that are very long. Russia, Iran, and Cuba. There are three big octopuses, and you see the tentacles. I can tell you Belarus, I know the people that fought for democracy in Belarus, Russian tentacle. Lots of Russian tentacles everywhere. Iran, you know the tentacles. Hamas, Hezbollah, and everything else they do, and they're nefarious. Cuba is the head of our Latin American octopus, a country being run by people that have been governing longer than I've been alive. And I'm a grandfather twice already. But Raúl Castro, Ramiro Valdez are older than my father, who does not get his driver license renewed in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And these people have a license to drive, destroy, and sink into the ground Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and stir up trouble everywhere else. And they're doing it with the acquiescence of the Western world. And they run Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua are the three tropical tyrannies of the Caribbean. Talk about the pirates of the Caribbean. They are it. Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And my country's on the waiting list. So if I want to save myself, I want Cuba to be free. And I think Cuba Libre should stop being an oxymoron, alcoholic request at a bar late at night, and it should be a feeling that permeates everywhere around the world. And Cuba needs to be free and libre. And to close this point, why do I mention these three octopuses? Because yes, I'm all for Zelensky and respect to territorial integrity. But I tell my friends in Europe, we have somebody in Latin America that is as important for us as Zelensky is for you. María Corina Machado in Venezuela, and Juan Guaido knows it. This woman has been, let me tell you, I'm sure there's Luis Miguel fans here. You know the songs, Luis Miguel. La Incondicional. She is La Incondicional. She was always there. I met her when she was counting votes with Sumate. Juan was finishing high school, I think. Then we were right. María Corina is much younger than I, by the way, but that doesn't matter. But she's been at it for a while, and she supported everything. And Juan knows that when we were there in 2014 to visit Leopoldo López and Ramo Verde, Ledesma, Ceballos, she was always there. She was with you. Juan would get on the Jeep. We'd go to Los Morros. What was that jail where they took Ceballos?
Ramo Verde?
No. Santiago de los Morros.
San Juan del Morro.
San Juan de los Morros. Just a dungeon that they took him down. And we were there. And there was María Corina. And when we won the Congress, they disbarred her from running because she did not declare in her income statement the cesta tickets, the food vouchers of the Congress. She did not declare them. So they gave her a 1-year sentence. She couldn't run. She still campaigned. When Juan took over, she was there supporting. When the military people were jailed, she was there with the families. When Pernalete, Vallenilla, Lander were killed, she was there with the families. It is her, she's still there, mother by Zoom, cannot doesn't have a passport, cannot travel, cannot get in a commercial airplane because the Hezbollah Hamas buddies say that she's a terrorist. She could blow up a plane. So she has to drive everywhere, and she does it, and she delivers, and she is committed. And the last man standing in Venezuela is a woman, and the time is 2024, is María Corina Machado, and we have to make sure she is there. And in closing in this point, I gave you the three octopuses: Cuba, Russia, Iran. Guess where they converge? He can tell you for a fact. Juan Guaido, I'm sure we can all spend time trying to find something to nibble about what he did. He's a hero. He stood there. He risked his liberty. He risked his family. He risked his integrity and everything to get us to where we are. Now it's María Corina's turn to finish the job. And in this discussion that we're going to have with María Corina, if you're worried about the octopuses, let me tell you something. Juan knows this for a fact. Venezuela has been occupied territory for a long time. It's been occupied by the sheriff, not the sheriff with an S, sheriff with a C and a double H. Cuba, Hezbollah, Hamas, ELN, Russia, Iran, FARC have dismembered the country, and they've occupied it for a long, long time. So we're not only talking about democracy and liberty for Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. We're talking about a hemisphere that is free of this pernicious negative influences, and it's all riding on her. I say, Mr. Biden, you're the president. Blinken, you guaranteed the Barbados agreement. You said by November 30th, she has to be they have to let her run for office. She has to be, I forget what the term was. I'll read the community. Huh? No, habilitada, no, but it's an English word that they wrote. This is, I'm quoting Blinken. Expedited reinstatement of all candidates by November 30th. We're not talking about all. We're talking about one with a name, María Corina Machado. So happy Thanksgiving. Have your turkey, but by November 30th, Mr. President Biden, Mr. Blinken, if María Corina Machado is not reinstated and habilitada, please return the turkey, because we're not going to lose democracy and liberty if you do not let her run. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much, President Quiroga. Thanks for bringing us to our own crisis and this picture about what's going on in the region. And I'm sure we're going to Venezuela in a second, but first, let me introduce President Iván Duque, former president of Colombia, as you know, and as you may know by now, also one of our senior leadership fellows at the Adam Smith Center. President, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, María Paula. Thank you, Tuto, dear Juan, Jamil, and thank you all, Carlos Diaz, director of the Adam Smith Center. I think Tuto has mentioned many important things today, but I think in the context of the question that was asked by María Paula, what is the stand of Latin America in the circumstances that we're living globally? And I'll say that maybe the end of this year and 2024, and maybe the following years, if not decades, are going to be marked by 3 C's: climate, conflict, crisis. Climate, because there's no doubt, and I mentioned this morning, that we're not suffering a climate crisis. We're now maybe at the stage of a climate boiling, and we're not going to meet our NDC targets by 2030 unless we do something substantially in this hemisphere, and especially in Latin America. And I'll mention why. But also because we're not going to reach the target of stabilizing the planet's weather at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this has to make us reflect that this is not time for mitigation, but instead time for adaptation. And if the adaptation doesn't occur fast, we'll be severely losing in the upcoming years. But why is Latin America so important for climate? Because we have the Amazon basin. And the Amazon basin is maybe as big as the United States without Alaska. We're talking of more than 7 million square kilometers. We're talking about the most important biodiverse spot on the planet. And we're talking about a place that captures or holds almost 30% of all the world's biodiversity in just one place. So if we don't react to the fact that we have been losing the size of California and Texas together in Amazonic land in the last 4 decades, the Amazon will become a net emitter of greenhouse gases and not a contention wall, as it should be. So the protection of the Amazon is crucial for the whole Western Hemisphere, including the U.S., to meet the determined contributions by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, if we assume that we're capable of stopping deforestation, triggering the recovery, and also the protection of the Amazonic basin, what we can also tell in advance is that the mobilization of massive amount of capital to market-driven, nature-based solutions is going to be able to deploy capital to communities in rural areas that will become protectors of the most important hotspot in this hemisphere. But also Latin America has 70% of the world high-altitude ecosystems, better known as the páramos. They're sources of fresh water to multiple cities, but this is an ecosystem that is highly connected ecosystemically with the Amazon. So if we destroy the Amazon, we destroy the páramos, or vice versa. So this is also one of the most important treasures that we have in this hemisphere. And if we talk about the coral reefs, we have the second largest coral reef in the planet in Belize. But if we integrate the whole America's coral reef ecosystem, we're having maybe the most important connected ecosystemic network on the planet when it comes to the oceans. And that's why in times where there are many talks and pledges, we have acted responsibly by creating with Panama, Costa Rica, and Ecuador the largest maritime protected area in the planet that is called the Hermandad Protected Area. So that's why if we really want to do something meaningful in terms of climate, Latin America is a key player. Now, conflict. The conflicts that are emerging in the world are interconnected, and we have to tell that seriously. Ukraine is not just an aggression and a genocide that has been triggered by Vladimir Putin. Ukraine, it's the battle of democracy against autocracy. Ukraine is the best example of why Europe has to be protected. And it's also very important because what Vladimir Putin is seeking is not just returning to its territory what he believes was part of the USSR, but also because he has the conception that through a more invasive act against Ukraine, he will have a larger control of gas supplies and energy control of Europe. So the protection of Ukraine has to continue. We have to defend democracy, and we have to stand with the Ukrainian people. I know this has been costly, but it'll be much more costlier to let Putin go his own way. That's why most of the Latin American countries need to raise the voice. And what's happening, Maria Paula, is that many governments in the Americas are looking to the other side. Why? Because they are in bed with Vladimir Putin interests in Latin America, and that has to be denounced. And also, when we look at what's going on in the Middle East, we have to say things clearly. Hamas is a terrorist organization. What Hamas did is the example of brutality in all its dimensions. And it's sad to see governments in Latin America, including the government of my country, that was not able to raise their voice and denounce that act of miserable conduct. And when you remain silent in those circumstances, you become an accomplice of terrorism. And that's why we have to raise our voice and clearly understand that what is at stake here is who are the ones who stand in favor of the rule of law and who are the ones that are standing in favor of terrorists. And definitely, all the Grupo de Puebla has become a voice for Hamas and never rejected the acts of terror that we saw, sadly, in Israel. Now, saying that as well, it's also very important to understand the trap that was set for Israel. Hamas knows that once they act brutally, they were thinking on what was going to be their reaction. And whatever the reaction was, it was aimed to isolate the state of Israel. And obviously, and I have said this publicly, any reaction has to be based on international humanitarian law standards and with the right level of proportionality. But let's make no mistake. What is at stake here is not to try to go back and find reasons to justify what Hamas did, as many governments have done. What is clear is that the whole Middle East knows that to build peace, Hamas can no longer exist because they have plotted against peace for many years, and they have been an obstacle for a two-state solution. And we have to figure it out from the standpoint of democracy, liberty, and prosperity, what the countries of this region must say. And when it comes to crisis, the crisis that we're going to see in the following years are going to be a food security crisis, but Latin America can be part of the solution. We have not only the largest amount of arable land today in the world to support the needs of the planet, we have the main sources of fresh water, and we can turn this region into the Saudi Arabia of green hydrogen and green ammonia if we have the right investment. But also Latin America is the largest provider of cobalto, lithium, and other materials, including copper, that are crucial for the energy transition around the world. And when we think about financial crisis that could also occur, the emergence of a middle class in Latin America, the macroeconomic stability, the fiscal stability, and also the overall protection of the financial systems allow this region that if there are shocks in some other parts in the world, the aggregated demand of this region is going to be very important to sustain economic growth globally. And I'll finish by saying the other crisis that could emerge in the upcoming years that is also related to trade, because the trade debates are going to be growing in intensity. Latin America, it's a closest market to the US. It is a market that is more aligned on values, principles, and history, and it's also a market that has better labor workforce standards. So if we're going to think of reducing dependency in Asia or in China, nearshoring has to occur, and the only place where nearshoring can occur with the right methods and the right principles and values is in Latin America. So I'll finish by saying that the 3 C's, climate, conflict, and crisis, have in this region a solution and not a problem. And that's why we should look at Latin America with those 3 lenses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Presidente Duque. As you have heard, the President has begun to point opportunities and solutions, and we are going deep there later. But right now, let me welcome Juan Guaido. Every Venezuela's friend knows Juan Guaido and feels himself or herself as Juan's friend. So we're very happy to have you here. And as you have seen and known him and his fight, let me add, as former acting president of Venezuela, he's also a senior leadership fellow at the Adam Smith Center. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria Paula. Thank you, Carlos, for the invitation. It's an honor to me being here with so important leaders in the region, champions for democracy, for Latin America, and for our people. I have to warn you again, my English is like a light version of the English. but I'm gonna do my best. In this moment, thank you. In this moment, the region is in a severe crisis. The democracy is under attack all over the world. That dilemma between authoritarian regimes versus democracy, it's in the heart of America, so Latin America, Venezuela, where I come from. I just arrived 6 months ago here at the US, passing through Colombia, a very different Colombia, I have to say, because not only the populism, the temptation, of course, your institutions are strong. That's a very good news also to our region. But in these 6 months, looking the region through these eyes, this new role, I have to say the democracy is the only way to achieve progress, to make accountable that kind of regimes, to make our people live better. And I mean, the democracy is about people. It's about dignity. It's about reduce the poverty gap that we have not only in Latin America, but around the world. And for that, we need determination. We need help also. I'm here because also you help us. You, President Duque, you, President Tuto, you, President Jamil. And I have to say this. I'm free and alive. And that's a privilege for those who face that kind of regimes. María in this moment is not only the last woman, she represents an important opportunity for democracy, for the stabilization of our region. Cuba, Russia, Iran, China have not only tentacles in Venezuela, they also have operations. They have bases back in Venezuela. When we face in the ground that kind of regimes, we have to mobilize, to organize our people, to communicate in the better way that we can, because we don't have media, television, radio. We only have a few tools, social media, of course, that also Russia, Sputnik invade, and they use it to watch his propaganda. That's also a very big issue in this moment, not only in Latin America, but around the world. The fake news. And the fake news in Venezuela is not about fake news. It's not about misinformation. It's about psyops. It's about to try to demoralize our people, to dismobilize our people, to attack President Duque, to attack Tuto Quiroga when he goes to Venezuela. So we have to stand once and again, not only for democracy, for the people, for our rights, for get progress in the region. When you saw what happened in this border, in the southern border of the United States of America, it's about Maduro. It's about Russia. It's about how to destroy a whole country in this moment. Good news in this difficult picture in this moment. We can say, we resist. We have an opportunity. But to make possible that opportunity, we need to make some changes. You talk about President Duque, Russia and Ukraine, about Hamas, about what happened in this moment. When you look the incentive that Vladimir Putin have, that Hamas or Maduro, we have to question what are the incentive to Maduro when he saw Ortega kidnapping leaderships back in Nicaragua and nothing happened. what are the incentive to a guy like Maduro? What are the incentive to a terrorist group like Hamas when they saw Putin invade Ukraine? And I mean, a little bit happened. The international incentive to make accountable that kind of regimes or terrorist groups are not in a good position in this moment. I have to say it. We have to make improvements to our tools. Sanctions, yes, of course. We have to get better. We have to make possible instruments like International Criminal Court that have today, by the way, an audience to point Maduro like a criminal, like a human rights criminal in this moment when Maria Corina is trying to reach Anzoátegui, who is a state from Oriental Venezuela. So we're facing that, and we have to make improvements in the incentive. Why? But we in Venezuela, President, and you know it perfectly, we face an unbalanced field. It's like you play soccer in a 45 degrees field, and our ball wasn't the ball, it was a rock. And the regime kidnapped all our team and tortured them and point them. So if we have to balance the field, we need that kind of tools to make accountable that kind of regimes to help not only democracy, to help make progress. If we want to see not only a free continent, not only a possible free continent, we have to make democracy attractive again. And the consequences of democracy, I mean, reduce the poverty gap, reduce migration. And I have to say this like a testimony that Tuto Quiroga say about Iván Duque. Iván Duque is a champion for vulnerable and humble people from Venezuela, from migrants. Thank you, President. I don't have the opportunity to say it in person before, but that's very important. And I say in this moment like a migrant, like a refugee, who are also looking for help for our people. 8 million Venezuelans are outside Venezuela. That's 25% of our population that have left Venezuela because the communists, because a dictatorship, because they're looking for opportunities to help our people back in the ground. And this final thought in this presentation. Since I became an exile, my thoughts are being around one thing: how to protect the frontliners. Why? If we want to play soccer, we need a team, of course. We need a field. If we want to achieve democracy, if we want to make opposition, we need oppositors. We need men's and women's on the ground to play the game. And we need to protect them from dictatorship. We need to protect Maria Corina and all in the ground that in this moment are facing huge risks on his life. And you know, I am saying this because I know of, because we're facing a lot of this. So for that, we need your voices. We need your voices to raise the awareness what happened in Venezuela, but also with democracy around Latin America and the world. The consequences of what happened is we lose that central values, and how to improve that tools for make possible not only a level, a fair play but also to achieve a transition. We can do it in Venezuela. We have one shot. We have a gain because we resist, because we can go on. And in that matter, in that issue, we need all the help that we can achieve, that we can use. And your voice in this moment, in this country, is central. It's essential to make possible a new opportunity for Venezuela, for the region, and for a stop not only Maduro, but also Putin in Latin America, Iran in Latin America, Hamas in Latin America, and also China. But we need your help. So I hope the next World Strategic Forum, we can do it in Caracas, maybe, in a free and fair Venezuela. I'm for sure, I can talk for her. María will receive us back in Venezuela. And again, Carlos, thank you very much. Iván, presidente, muchas gracias, por lo que ha hecho por Venezuela, por nuestro país. Es primera vez en años que podemos conversar en persona. Parte de la lucha por la democracia precisamente es la comunicación, es la fraternidad, es la empatía que sentimos los venezolanos cada vez que levantaban la voz. Y esto lo digo en español porque además estamos en Miami, y es la capital del Spanglish. Pero cuando estamos en terreno, cuando estamos arriesgando la vida todos los días, una palabra de aliento es alimento al espíritu, es alimento a la lucha, es la determinación que mostraron en cada testimonio, es la posibilidad de recuperar nuestro país. Y concluyo con esta frase, y la debo reiterar. Tenemos la oportunidad de ver una Venezuela democrática. Tenemos la oportunidad de ver un continente libre. Tenemos la oportunidad de detener esa barbarie que estamos viendo en algunas otras partes del continente. Solo hace falta un intangible poderoso, que es esperanza, y le agreguemos determinación. Con los incentivos correctos del mundo libre, y por supuesto con lo que estamos haciendo en este momento en terreno. Muchísimas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, President Guaidó. Thank you, and let me add a few names. Juan Guaido, Leopoldo López, Antonio Ledesma, María Corina Machado, and so many others. Thank you all for showing us that there's so much strength and hope to keep democracy alive in Venezuela. Thank you very much. Now, let me introduce President Jamil Mahuad, Witt, former president of Ecuador, also one of our senior leadership fellows at the Adam Smith Center. Glad to be here with you, President Mahuad. And let me go back to my first question. Besides what we have pointed at the beginning of this panel, are we, as Latin Americans, in the middle of a new world order dispute? What do you think? What can you share with us?
Thank you, María Paula, first for moderating this debate. And thank you, Carlos, for the invitation, and to your wonderful team for all the effort to produce this wonderful event. You have here a kind of mosaic of Latin America. If you go geographically from north to south, we will start here with Venezuela, Colombia, then Ecuador, and Bolivia. At one point in time, Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador form just one nation with the Gran Colombia. But that is 19th century, almost at the beginning of the century. So we have heard very important perspectives. President Quiroga from Bolivia has shown his enormous understanding of geopolitics. He talked about all the countries that are related to our part of the world. He could explain the alliances, not only among states, but with groups, not only state actors. And we could understand all the danger we are facing now, especially when these groups are co-opting pieces of the governments and influencing the decisions. In the case of President Duque, he had explained the three most important dangers that we're facing, and the three C's, as he explained that, and gave a different perspective. And in the case of Juan Guaido, you could feel the anguish of a person who had a tremendous responsibility and trying to keep alive the flame of democracy, being surrounded by all the obstacles you can imagine to do that job. So he suffered a lot personally with all his family, and he was able to continue the fighting. That brings us now to a moment in which a democratically elected candidate, Maria Corina Machado, could face Maduro in the next election. We have to fight for that. I was wondering what could be my contribution here, besides everything we have heard so far. And let me tell you what could be the perspective from a private firm, from the private sector. And I would go back to the moment I was president of Ecuador 2 decades ago. We faced the worst economic crisis in the 20th century for my country. We were hit by El Niño. We have heard that El Niño this year is going to be very tough. So 80% of our exports were represented by 4 products. We lost 3 of them, bananas, shrimps, and fishery. And the 4th, the oil price went down to $7 per barrel. 7. That meant a big fiscal crisis. In those circumstances and a lot of social suffering, we made a very big decision. We decided to sacrifice the national currency of Ecuador, the sucre, and adopt the dollar of the United States as the national currency of Ecuador. It was the first country who did it in the world. So there were no references to where to learn from. Now, in those circumstances, there was an enterprise in Ecuador, and especially in the shrimp sector. The shrimp farms were completely destroyed by El Niño. And on top of that, we had a white spot, which was an illness of the shrimp. And how the private sector thought about that. We have learned so much from that. First, you remember that Einstein said that if somebody will give him 60 seconds to solve a problem, he will use 59 seconds in thinking about the problem and 1 second in trying to find the solution. And that coincides with Peter Drucker, the great guru of the private sector from some decades ago. And he said that in Eastern societies, they use 80% of the time in understanding the problem and just 20% of the time in finding the solution. In the Western civilization, we do the opposite. We analyze the problems very shallowly, and then we try to sell our solution to others. In the first case, if you, in a group, analyze the problem, sometimes even with the risk of being repetitive, the problem becomes so clear that you don't have to sell the solution. It's almost obvious for everybody. But if you do the opposite, every person can bring a different solution, and then you have the big debate, not about the nature of the problem, but about how to solve it. So the shrimp sector in Ecuador identified the problem. They changed a lot of chips in their minds. First, we thought that the only way to cultivate shrimps was to find places where the rivers went to the ocean, because you needed the 2 waters, salt water and fresh water. They changed their mind. They understood that that is not a real requisite. And second, because of the white spot, 10% of the shrimps were surviving and 90% were dying. What was the typical solution? Put antibiotics, try to avoid the death of these shrimps. This company in particular, the biggest in the world right now, decided the opposite. Why this 10% is not dying? So get the 10% and multiply that 10%. And you get a very strong shrimp, and you don't need to put antibiotics or anything on that. So they were growing year by year. Last year, they exported $1.6 billion in shrimps from Ecuador. They signed a commercial agreement with the enterprise in Japan a few days ago. Japan bought a piece of the company. They are investing now in Vietnam to develop the sector, and probably next year they will export $2 billion in shrimps. That means that the dollars that will come through shrimps are higher than the dollars that will come from oil in Ecuador. And this is very sustainable. Just to mention another thing, in the last COVID, remember that there were many problems with the containers in the ports of the world because the flow of the traffic was interrupted. Well, they didn't have that problem. With the frozen shrimps, they put the containers inside the water. They didn't need to use the space on the ports themselves, and they didn't suffer anything of that. So what lessons can we learn from that experience? One, I would say, would be between about the connection between private and public sector. In my view, the public sector are like the conductor of an orchestra. You can define very basic things. You need to put the frame of the whole thing and then allow the musicians to play. And the musicians are the private sector. The moment the conductor wants to go to substitute the violinist and start playing the violin or the clarinet or whatever, you confuse your roles, you only make problems, and you interfere. So the first rule, make the framework and don't interfere. Allow the private section to play. Second is that when you identify a place, this is old business practice. If you can identify a place where you have a comparative and competitive advantage, use that. We produce bananas. Bolivia, no. But the other three countries, yes. There's no way you can plant bananas in Alaska and be competitive. Not even with great subsidies. So use your natural resources. President Duque has made a very long list about the possibilities we have in Latin America, water, etc. That is another lesson. The third one is that even with all the problems that we face in our countries, if you are consistent and you put good bases, you can prosper. We are accustomed to deal with difficulties. We never had the calmness and the very clear rules that you can find, for example, in the United States or Europe. However, playing according with our rules, we can prosper, and anybody that comes to our part of the world can do that. Culture is basic. Culture is very important, and you have to play with your local culture. When they say, why don't you do these things? I remember this specific case in one of the classes at Harvard. They said the people in Norway have discovered a very efficient way to deal with oil. They have wonderful results. Why don't you apply the Norwegian ways in Latin America? And I said, why don't you play football like the Brazilians in Norway? Because you have different abilities, different conceptualizations, different ways of doing things. So play with your culture and use the natural resources that we have. We are a land of opportunities, not only in the future, I have shown you in the present as well. And we need your help. We need the money. And we are ready to cooperate with all of you. And you need some minutes to continue, so I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Mahuad. I was thinking about a second round, a shorter one, to talk about opportunities. But after what President said, let's take 2 more hours to talk about opportunities and future. No, just joking. I'm taking some questions, but let me just introduce one idea so presidents can answer your questions. If you go back to the program, the name of this panel was Latin America's Next Chapter. So I want to invite you presidents to think about that idea for the final questions from the public. What's Latin America's next chapter? Not only what you see, but what may be. If we make the right choices, if we take the right decisions, what may be. Now, let's take your questions, please.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to address the fact of the current movement globally of decentralization, which compromises everything from science, technology, innovation, engineering, and the finance sector, including the role of central banks that are corrupt. And I think everybody has realized it by now already. So I wanted to touch bases because I think it's very positive. It's a very positive approach for many economies, like what we're seeing in Venezuela, Argentina. It has nothing to do with politics, left or right. It is technology and science and innovation. And I would love to pick your brain of what the future of that will look like. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. President Duque, for addressing the Amazon and climate matters.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you're okay with that, President, I'm taking all the questions so we can make a final round here. Back there. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of you to come in and take the time to speak to us today. I'm a student at FIU, huge supporter of Adam Smith Center. It's a great opportunity. We've heard a lot about the external threats to democracy today. I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the internal threats? What are the internal threats to democracy? And if you had to weigh both, do you think external threats are more dangerous or internal threats more of a danger to democracy?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The last one, please make it short.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'd like to address my question to President Iván Duque about the first C on climate change, right? So I think that, you know, the current temperature anomaly is about 1.3%, and we know that it's going to cross the dangerous threshold by around 2036 and 2046. So you said about, you know, what drastic actions we can do in Latin America to actually address that. So as, you know, as a continent or as an individual. Thank you.
Thanks. Last one. Sorry, I can take more.
Hi. So good afternoon. Many people in my generation are very fearful for the future, given that we're living in times of crisis and chaos. I was wondering if you have any words of motivation for us to look at this new chapter with positivity and, you know, excitement for our future lives. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great final question. Presidente Quiroga, por favor.
Okay, thank you. Briefly, first on the what you touched on, the opportunities and what was mentioned about Federal Reserve and what have you. There are great opportunities up ahead. Argentina votes November 19th. Many people consider Argentina the birthplace of populism that was exported to other countries. And of course, by now, it's too benign a term to capture the destruction that it brings about. Venezuela may have been populist at the beginning to seize power, then became hegemonical to stay in power, and became tyrannical to stay in power forever. And the same thing can be said about other countries. But Argentina is voting November 19th. I take sides. I'm not lukewarm. Macri's my friend. Milei, go for it. November 19th, I hope he becomes the next president of Argentina. I know you can find lots of things to question about Milei, but we should learn from the other side. They're called Socialismo 21. They're really Socios Listos 21. They're corrupt. They help the narcos. They help each other. They have no qualms about what they do, and yet here we come getting on the other side. Let me tell you, if you know something about Argentina, the Massa-K combination, K, the Kirchners, you have to be a masochist to vote for the Massa-Kas. After the inflation, devaluation, indebtedness, crime, and everything they vote. And it would, you know, the reason it's important, because why did we lose momentum in Venezuela? Because we lost the big four. We always had the Castros. We had Chavez for a long time. But Chavez, at the apex of his power, never had the big four. He never had Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil. Well, it turns out that Maduro, the clown, has all four appeasing him and helping him out. And that makes the fight much more difficult at the OAS and the inter-American system. The big four countries, Argentina is the first one. Hopefully we can get it back. Then we'll see next year about Mexico. And so for the ones of you that don't know, I was there in Mexico with Xochitl, engineer, women who can be president of Mexico and make it a country that respects democracy everywhere. Maria Corina Machado is also an engineer, by the way. So maybe it's time for the best soap opera, real life. Next year will be two engineers, dos ingenieras, un camino. Maria Corina in Venezuela and Xochitl in Venezuela. Those are the opportunities. And I mentioned another one, a comment on the money. I think the U.S. has a great opportunity in the following. The best functioning institution in the United States of America is the Federal Reserve Board. When there's problems, domestic issues inside the U.S., they start doing quantitative easing. I will not dwell into my technical economic background. Sounds like a stomach ailment, right? Quantitative easing. But at the heyday of quantitative easing, the Fed was printing $1 Brazil per year. The dollars were blowing out the window. But it's such an effective institution that when inflation shoots up, you got to revert, and the Federal Reserve blower becomes a vacuum cleaner. And it starts vacuuming all the dollars with high interest rates, and it creates disbalances in Latin America that come to bear on indebtedness and difficulties. Guess what the opportunity is? China now is a creditor country for the first time. There's a big debt trap. You see it in many countries. In Sri Lanka, you see it in Bangladesh, you see it in Pakistan. You will start seeing it in our parts of the world. And if the U.S. would seize the moment on those huge bills they do for the billions of dollars that come around, just give me like a waiter, a small little tip of 3% on capital allocation to the Inter-American Development Bank that Iván Duque knows so well. And that would provide amazing leverage for the U.S. to be able to furnish foreign currency in times of difficulty and take a lead over China beyond just preaching, with money, with lending and investment, with nearshoring, with the production chains, and it will change everything. Another opportunity that we have, Iván mentioned everything about climate. In a triangle between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, we have 60% of the world's lithium. So maybe one day we'll be buying the Manchester City teams and the Manchester United. Maybe we'll buy Messi with all the lithium that is there. What you should be worried about is that a lithium battery, and I won't bore you with the details, is like a tennis match. On one side, the Ayatollah racket. On the other side, Djokovic. The Ayatollah racket is Komani, cobalt, manganese, nickel. On the other side, Djokovic, graphite. Lithium is the balls. They keep going. Cathode, anode, charge, discharge. Guess what country is refining between 66 to 95% of each of those things I mentioned? Cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, lithium. China. So you better wake up and you better start cracking, because that is the world that we have, and we do have lots of lithium, and it'll be ideal to be able to make batteries in South America and interact with value supply chains inside the Americas with countries that share our values. But the reality is China has got a first mover advantage there. Two last comments that I'll make in closing. When I talk about Russia, Iran, and everything that happens, people think I'm maybe exaggerating. I just ask you to Google April Lavrov. He did a tour. Where did he go? Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, because those regimes are hijos de Putin. All three of them. And that's where he went. And June, Google it, Raisi, the Ayatollah's water boy, the president of Iran. Where did he go? Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. And to my shame, the first stop Lavrov made was in Brazil. It embarrasses me as a Latin American that Lula would say, oh, Zelensky's too greedy. Give up Crimea. Let me tell you, in the 19th century, a drunk, perverted president of Bolivia, totally out of his head with the alcohol they gave him, put his thumb on a map and gave Brazil Acre, a big chunk of land, in exchange for a white horse. I kid you not. I kid you not. So if Lula is feeling so generous with Crimea, I asked him, why don't you return the Acre to us? I'll give you back the white horse, and we can talk about that. But that is the reality of what's happening in these parts of the world, and it's important to understand then the link with the fight and the struggle on Venezuela. And I'll net it out for you what is on the table. And please, this is, to me, the most important issue to understand on what the international community can do. There are three things on the table. There's plenty of things, but three main issues. One, María Corina habilitada, the prisoners released, and the exiles be able to return and do politics in their country, including Juan Guaido. That is the crux of the matter. And what is the second package in that? Their personal sanctions. The rewards from the DEA for Maduro, Cabello, Cilia, the International Criminal Court lawsuit that Iván Duque signed against Maduro, that is there pending. He wants to solve and fix all those issues. And the third, the reason that Juan Guaido is hated by this regime is the following. I forget, there was a TV show when I was a little boy, $6 Million Man. What was it?
Nombre nuclear.
No, $6 Million Man or something like that. Yeah.
$7 million.
Several million. Well, Juan Guaido is the multi-billion-dollar man. Why does Maduro hate him? Because Maduro could not steal the oil flow money from PDVSA anymore. Maduro could not use the $2 billion in the UK central bank that Juan Guaido preserved for the Venezuelan people. Maduro could not touch the $5 billion worth of SDRs at the IMF that was deposited on the account of Venezuela. Maduro could not touch Citgo, which is a company headquartered in Houston, because Juan Guaido protected it. Start tallying it up. $5 billion on SDRs, $2 billion on the gold. I don't know how many billions is Citgo worth. 10, 20, whatever. So he prevented Maduro from looting, let's say, $17-25 billion. Now, the question is, before the next year election in Venezuela, are they going to give that money to Maduro to fund his campaign? No, they cannot do that. María Corina has to be able to run, and I'll make him a deal. The day after the vote, clean vote, María Corina candidate, whoever's president has the right to get those SDRs, the gold and Citgo and everything else. So that is what is at stake right now in Venezuela. And trust me, I know a lot. We're in Miami. It will affect and impact Cuba. But take my word for it. María Corina is allowed to run because we do not let them have the money. We do not do the sanction lifting before time. She will be the next president of Venezuela. And once Venezuela is free, I'll be able to fulfill my pledge that I never could do. I was in Cuba once, 4 hours. They kicked me out. I wanted to put a flower in the cemetery where Osvaldo Payá is buried. The greatest Latin America who was never in government, the greatest Latin American democratic icon is Osvaldo Payá. If I was Cuban, I'd be proud as I could be of Osvaldo Payá. And he was a democratic genius, and he always said about Cuba, the night will not be eternal. Trust me, María Corina becomes president of Venezuela, the night will be over in Cuba, sunrise will be here, and we'll have a bright new day of freedom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Quiroga. Now we are listening President Duque.
Well, I think Tuto has said it all. No, honestly saying, and I agree with you, President Quiroga, going to Maria Paula's question of what comes next for Latin America, I want to simplify 5 core ideas. The first one, the next big thing we have to do is to defeat populism and demagoguery. And we have proven in the Colombian local elections some days ago that it is possible. We've seen that in Ecuador it was possible. We've seen that in Paraguay it is possible. So we want to see the defeat of populism in Argentina. We want to see the defeat of populism in Venezuela. That doesn't happen overnight. And in particular, in the case of Venezuela, I just want to make this message to all the democratic resistance one. It is not up to Maduro to legitimate Maria Corina's aspiration for the presidency. She is legitimate. And she is legitimate because she has been legitimized by the people, not by a dictator. And that needs to continue. And it is very important to what was agreed in Barbados that when we look at the end of November, it is not for Maduro to say in November, okay, I've received so much pressure that I'm just going to allow Maria Corina to run, because that's a trap. And what he's trying to get with that bargain is that he gives up Maria Corina's aspiration to say that he will run again for office. And he knows that's his bet, because he wants the election to happen with him as a candidate, for him to remain in power, to steal the election, and to try to get the legitimacy that he needs today after the diplomatic isolation that he has suffered over the last years. We can't fall in this trap. We have to defeat populism, and this must be an issue that concerns the public, the private, the civil society in all the hemisphere. The second thing, the next Latin America has to be a Latin America where we also win the communication wars that we're seeing. There are a lot of populists trying to present themselves as progresistas. And as I said this morning, they are pobrecistas, because they are impoverishing the people of Latin America. And we need to show that before the eyes of the younger population that they have tried to manipulate, trying to present themselves as saviors, while they only want to lucrate out of the tragedy of the Latin American people. And we need to defeat that communication war by clearly presenting the people of Latin America that there's no way out of poverty without a market economy, without a market economy that also helps to close the social divide. And we're losing that communication war because most of the entrepreneurs in Latin America, they say, and let me say this in Spanish, ellos dicen que no se meten en política. If they don't se meten en política, la política se mete con ellos. And that's why we need an active, vibrant private sector that is helping Latin America to win the communication war. The third element that is very important, Latin America has to stabilize itself as a land of opportunity for entrepreneurship, energy transition, climate technologies, strategic infrastructure, and nearshoring. And that has to be a must. It has to be embraced by every political actor in this hemisphere. The fourth element, we need to see Latin America as a reference model for dealing with migration. You don't have to be a rich country to do the right thing on migration. We were not a rich country in Colombia. And I remember when I had to face the debate of giving the temporary protection status, some of my advisors thinking, just on the numbers of the poll, said, Mr. President, if you do this, you're going to waste all your political capital. And Mr. President, we might see an increase on multidimensional poverty. We might see an increase of informality, and we might also see an increase of unemployment. I remember that I sat down with Danny Bahar, a Venezuelan economist who has worked on migration for many, many years. And we looked at the numbers. And I said, if I have to burn all the political capital to demonstrate that a integrated, embracive, and also genuine, socially speaking, migration policy, we're going to do it. And we're going to prove that all those premises are wrong. Well, you know what? We gave the temporary protection status to almost 2 million Venezuelan citizens, and unemployment numbers came down, informality came down, and multidimensional poverty came down. So it is possible. And last but not least, Latin America has a population where more than 70% it's below 45 years old. It is a young workforce. It's a workforce that has also been trained in difficulty. And that creates innovation, disruptive innovation. Don't keep on looking for the chips to be made in Asia. Don't look to all the semiconductors to be made in Asia. The right marriage between university and the private sector in a young region with this disruptive, innovative, and creative capacity will allow Latin America to become part of the geopolitical strategic security of the Western Hemisphere, North America, the United States, and Canada. So that's the Latin America that I foresee. That's what comes next in Latin America, and it all begins by defeating populism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Duque. Now, if you can see all the organizers there, they're saying they're turning off the lights if we do not end now. So I don't know if I may have small message from both presidents.
Very shortly, Latin America have the largest oil reserve in the world, the fifth or sixth gas reserve in the world, the Amazon selva. We got 700 million people all over Latin America, not only a workforce, for also highly talented Latin American people who help to not only rise this country, but help around the world. In a democratic region, not only the power of the region, the leverage to all over the world is very useful to help all over the world to achieve democracy, peace, and stabilize the world. I see clearly that in our future. Work to do, of course, the democracy, like the question of our young student at FIU, the threat, internals or externals. Firstly, are internals, like in life. You are your biggest challenge to make possible your own future. So, of course, it's internal, the mainly threat. But, like everybody and like the philosopher said, I am I plus our circumstances. Of course, the external circumstances help or unhelp the recovery of democracy. You mentioned Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. It's more easy to Juan Guaido back in the ground, con with Iván Duque, that in this moment with Petro. I have to say it in that way, clearly. Of course, Petro is with Maduro, with the dictator back in Venezuela. If we have our better context, our better region, our better neighborhood, our better people helping other people, of course, it's going to be so easy. And for the young people, I'm considered still young, by the way. I was president of the National Assembly at 35 years old. Became interim president because of our constitution. I heard one time back in the student movement that we lost a campaign against Chavismo in my hometown. It's like the strong force in that moment, Chavez, in 2006 or 7, $100 a barrel. I mean, it was almost impossible. And I say when people, maybe one time you can become a concejal, a councilor, or maybe one time in your life you can become a mayor. One time, I'm thinking about it. I mean, this is a new generation. You have to take your future on your hands. You can do it. I, back in Venezuela in 2008, it was impossible to beat Chavez or Maduro, and we still have an opportunity when they are an authoritarian regime. You have the war. You have your decisions and the freedom to come, not only in Latin America, but also in your hands. So go for it. That's the future of our world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Guaidó. Now, President Mahuad, please, your final words.
Thank you very much. I think if we have to choose one big problem for all the countries in Latin America, is the need to stop what President Pastrana calls narco-populism. Why? Because basically, what is politics? Politics is the way a society finds to decide who gets what and who pays the price. In its essence, I think that is politics. For some people, the best way to do it is with a monarch or with a very authoritarian regime, with some kind of aristocracy, but we have chosen democracy. We believe in this different thing. And during many decades in our history, we have got very good results. This morning, President Duque was enumerating the good results that in democratic periods, playing by the democratic rules, we have got. Almost in every single election in Latin America now, we are taking the risk of losing that democratic framework. Many things happen in many countries. And we say, look, this happened here, this happened there, etc. What a coincidence. Let me just put on the table a different perspective. What if they are not coincidences, but executions of a very elaborated plan to destroy democracy? First, affecting the reputation of democracy. The needs are almost infinite. The resources are so small. You will never be able to cover all the aspirations of the population. You can explain that, or you can tell the population, go to the streets and protest and say that democracy is useless. And increasingly, they are doing the second. I heard this observation about a recent election. It was in Chile, I think. They said there were so many flags there, representing so many interest groups, that maybe the only flag that was missing was the flag of Chile. You are losing the identity of a nation and are substituting that for the small identities of small groups. Now, the capacity of the narco-traffic to penetrate all the estaments of a society is limitless. The number I heard is that the narco-traffic mobilizes $240 billion per year. That is more than all the GDPs of the countries in Latin America, except maybe Brazil and Mexico. So they have the money, they don't have scruples, they have penetrated Congress, press, military, police, politics, etc. They have the possibilities of hiring people, 50,000, 60,000 people in my country, working for narco-traffickers now, big source of employment. So I will not go further. I just give you the taste of it. So I think the main task common to all of us is to stop that and to stop the narco-politics, the narco-populism, because that could be a big hole that will suck all of us inside.
Thank you, President Mahuad. Muchas gracias, presidentes. Muchas gracias a todos.
Well, thank you.
Just 10 seconds about Jamil. One thing, the young person asked, what should we do? Get involved, do something, and do something that matters. The elder statesman here is Jamil Mahuad. 25 years ago, he did peace between Peru and Ecuador, is still there. 23 years ago, he dollarized the country, is still there, and they're trying to copy it in Argentina. So get involved. If you're young, work in public sector, do something, and do something that matters, like Jamil Mahuad.
Thank you, President.